I borrowed $10,000 from my mom, and then community college professor gave me the basement of his house and 20 grand. So I went from my childhood bedroom to a teacher's basement. I think I paid myself $700 a month for like 2 years in a row. And then I just started hustling, just showing up everywhere.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Chris Halls, co-founder and CEO of Life360, which at the time of recording is the 15th largest app in the US with over $330 million in annual revenue and valued at over $3 billion in the public markets. We go inside his 2-decade journey of building a company and all the contrarian things they did along the way.
We did the opposite of prevailing startup advice. If we were to have, kind of air quotes, like trust the data, we would have shut down so many times. But I'm extremely happy we didn't take that advice because it was like probably 7 years of barely making it.
Fundraising lessons and benefits of building in an unsexy market.
That first couple of years, I was just showing up, taking every meeting I could. Like, to me, it was like a big deal to meet a single VC because I didn't have any network at all.
The time to beat a patent troll and bankrupted their law firm.
We had written so many small $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 checks, like enough was enough.
A crash course on preference stacks and going public in both Australia and the US.
Ironically, from a CEO standpoint, the NASDAQ's much easier than the SX. You want a few hedge funds that are probably going to be trading you in that very first day. The long only guys, you actually don't want to give them the full allocation, so if the IPO trades down, they're going to be there supporting you.
Lessons acquiring Tile, launching a hardware product, and when US teens almost canceled him on TikTok.
I was at a friend's house, and his teenage kids are like, "Are you the TikTok guy?" I was like, "No, never used TikTok." "No, you're the TikTok guy." And they pulled the phone, and there was like a meme going around. I didn't even know how TikTok worked.
Before we talk to Chris, I publish new episodes of The Peel every week, exploring the world's greatest startup stories. Check the show notes for more on the topics we discussed, explore the back catalog of almost 100 episodes, comment on Spotify and YouTube, share with a friend, and subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. Let's talk to Chris. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we were just talking, you feel like we're kind of at this era in just like, I don't know, corporate business world where we're kind of moving past the PR fluff and we're getting into more of just, I don't know, real talk, if that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, I'd say it's bigger. I think we were in this period of the ZERP interest rates and honestly a bit of coddle culture, and it was all about day in the life videos at Google and Twitter, and it was really hard to be a CEO where you were kind of a no-name and your employees could, if they didn't like what you were giving them, they could quit and work half as much for twice as much. And I think the world has changed. I think we're going to see that there's going to be a big shift to high performance cultures, and it's not about good or bad or right or wrong, just sort of the nature of the beast. The technology landscape's maturing. I think it was growth at all costs, and now that's not the case anymore. So the world's really shifted.
How have you changed all? Like, have you changed your approach or your style, or were there certain things you like clung to more than others at different times?
I think we've just had to navigate a lot, and I don't have a great answer for you, but I would say that I and other CEOs, there's a bit of a feeling of like relief that we can be ourselves and we can focus on business. And for good companies that were not overly or prematurely hyped, like our access to talent is amazing. And that's exciting because it used to be there'd be private companies with huge headline offers, but it'd kind of be like vaporware behind the scenes. And I know we're going to talk about it later, but some of our plans when we went public early was we did want to get rid of preference stacks, and it was very unsexy for some of what we did. But now I think companies like us, which were really solid growth and profitable and never had the public profile, it's been really good for us.
So for somebody who's not a founder with a public company, like how does that change the kind of offers that you can give someone, like a talent offer?
What's real cash? And it's not speculative. It can still go up, it can still go down, but what was happening a ton in like 2021, you'd have these companies that have these crazy headline valuations, like 10 billion with like, I think the craziest one was like Bolt, like 11 billion with hundreds of thousands of revenue. Man, must be a terrible fundraiser, but people would get these offers of common when they had this pref in front of them, and it wasn't real money, but people believed it. And I think people just got sucked into the hype. And so we were never able to give, as a public company, offers those huge headline numbers because it was like real cash. And it was a lot less sexy now, but now most people in the Valley either had one of these things blow up in their face or at least know someone who does. So the fact that like our equities, you can literally sell it the same day you get it if you want. I mean, we hope people double down for the future. Makes it much more compelling.
And what is Life360 for somebody who's never come across you guys before?
So I'll give two explanations. The quick one, which I hate doing, is like we're like Find My Friends on steroids, but for the family. So best location sharing app in the world with a bunch of safety features like knowing if your kid gets in a car accident or driving too quickly or live SOS. The bigger vision, though, is we're trying to be the digital hub for the family. So you have Facebook for friends, LinkedIn for professionals. Why hasn't someone won the family space in a similar way? And it's not for lack of trying. When we got started, it was like the era of social networks for everything. This was 17 years ago, so this has not been overnight by any means. But our insight was maybe the way to win families wasn't another social tool, but how about utility and safety and just knowing where family members were and where our ultimate vision, like people, pets, things, all in one map. It's just boring, good utility.
And you guys have gotten pretty big. You mentioned it was a long dream to get there, but I think I saw you're the 15th largest kind of consumer mobile app in the US. Like that's...
Yeah, that stat is based from data.ai, formerly App Annie, so third-party data. They rank apps by DAU. And so I think DAUs, if you go by that metric, which is like, okay, are you truly having engaged users? Yeah, we are way up there. And sometimes I'm surprised just how big it is, because it's bigger than some very, very big names like Pinterest or Roblox and all that. We don't have the revenue of all of them, but
maybe you'll get there.
Maybe. Well, I think we actually can. We can talk about the business model piece of it, but we have always taken a long game where if we can build a free user base and we can keep people over their different life stages, we can add on monetization later. So we're almost like the inverse of the dating apps, like a joke we make, which is actually not a joke. All right, sex versus safety. People will pay way more for sex. They vote with their dollars. But if you're a dating app and you do your job, you lose a customer. Whereas if we do our job, we have a customer for life and we can add different services on top of you. The one exception are apps like Grindr. They keep you forever as well, and that's why they're doing so well. Whereas the ones that truly get you married, they're having a harder time.
Like, did you know it could all be this big when you started it?
No, I actually found this old pitch deck, and the first one, it's like we were targeting a $300 million exit by 2013 because we got started in 2007. And even then, that sounded impossible. And I always consider myself an unlucky person. I always thought something bad would happen to me and I would fail. Obviously haven't. So I think like a lot of founders, like I've always had the big pie in the sky vision. I didn't think it would ever happen to me because I have this weird kind of fatalistic view, which is probably unfounded. Lots of therapy for that one. But then when it hit really hard. So I think this is not the question you asked, but if you think of like seed stage pitches, all the numbers are BS, but I bet most founders deep down have this concern they're going to fail. And then if it hits, it can get way bigger than you ever thought. I mean, we are an outlier in that regard. But yeah, it was kind of like, whoa, actually that whole idea that location sharing would be ubiquitous, we were right about that. And the focus on the family so we couldn't be commoditized, like, we were right about that. So we always thought it could be huge, but I didn't think it actually would happen, I guess.
Yeah, what was the story when you started? I know it was kind of middle of Hurricane Katrina. Can you just kind of take us inside when you first started everything?
I'll do the short version. We can go deeper on anything, but I did a school project. It's 2005. Hurricane Katrina happened. We wanted to use technology to help families reconnect after emergencies. It's literally for an entrepreneurship class. I wasn't planning on doing anything with it, so just put it in the filing cabinet, so to speak. I guess I'm actually getting a slightly longer version, but we can bounce around a bit. I did not want to be an entrepreneur, even though it's sort of in my blood. I grew up very middle class. My dad did startups. They never really worked, and we were like normal middle class family. But in high school, I kind of realized how tight everything was, and my mom was a school teacher and really held it all together. So I always wanted to make money, not for the ego. Maybe as a teenager, I think every teenage boy wants a Ferrari or something. But really, it was like stability and security. That was what drove me to try to pursue wealth. So I was going to be a banker. I did a summer analyst program at Goldman Sachs, and I got the full-time offer, but I did it after my senior year instead of junior year, because I had this like crazy idea that I wanted to go to the South Pole.
What?
Yeah, and I got hired as a dishwasher at the South Pole Research Station.
Is this like literally at the South Pole, or are you like...
Literally the one at the South Pole. It was just in my head. But I didn't get to go because they found a tumor in my neck on my physical. So I still have a scar, missing half a thyroid. You can kind of see it still. I'm fine now, but...
This was cancer? Like you literally had
They
cancer?
thought it was a very bad type of untreatable one, which is very scary. And the whole thing about the doctors not actually telling me what was going on fully, and I had to read the pathology reports myself and all that. So anyway, the good news is it was false positives and they cut out half my thyroid, and then I was fine. I had time on my hands. I had also applied to Harvard Business School as an undergrad and got in. I think I got in early because I was in the military before. So all of a sudden I had this time on my hands. I had this great option. I could just go to business school. So it's like, well, you know what? I value security, but I think this idea could be big. So I got a year of nothing to do. Why don't I just try it? And so if it weren't for that very weird sequence of events, I definitely would not have started the company. And if I didn't have these fallbacks, I probably wouldn't either. So I know that a lot of times people talk about how like the rich kids, they do it because they have the fallbacks. I actually really get that. I was not a rich kid, but my worst case scenario is banker at Goldman or student at HBS, and obviously those are not bad. So my risk was essentially zero.
I feel like that's important too. It's like you need to figure out how to de-risk the riskiest parts. Like that is basically what you're doing. Like there's risk that in building anything, and you figure out like what are the biggest risks and how do I eliminate them? And maybe that's like the piece of getting started is just eliminating those risks.
To say somewhat the obvious, when you're 22 or 23 or whatever, or anything under 30 without kids, like you really don't have any risk. And so I have a bit of a working theory that so many of the really, really big companies are started by 20-somethings, not because they're smarter, but because they can just say, screw it and go big. And if I were to start another idea, well, now I've made enough money that I can go big. And that is probably why you see some of the serial entrepreneurs do really well. But I think if you take someone, I'm 41, if I didn't have a nice nest egg, there are all these industry problems I see, but they're smaller. And I probably would take the safe bet to lock in my retirement. So good news, I think I would not do that, but I really understand it now. So that's my thought around why all the big luminaries are 20-somethings. And you have exceptions like Elon, who is already rich. So that's why, I mean, he's the outlier of outliers. But I do find, as an aside, when I mention his name, I found even in my own company, he evokes such strong reactions. So we now call him the name who shall not be mentioned.
Oh, so then for Life360, when you said you had some of it de-risked, you didn't have, a big nest egg that you were sitting on. What was kind of the process of getting everything going? Like, how did you fund things? Were you working part-time? How did it all start?
I borrowed $10,000 from my mom, and then I had a teacher who gave me, I think, 20 grand. And then I just started hustling, just showing up everywhere. And so I was in the military after high school, then actually did one year at Arkansas State, 1 year at community college, then transferred to Berkeley because I had to transfer in as a junior. And it was actually a community college professor gave me the basement of his house and 20 grand. So I went from my childhood bedroom to a teacher's basement. And so this started very modest. I think I paid myself $700 a month for like 2 years in a row or something. So, but it was fine. I know it's such a cliche, but you're not happier when you have money. You're less stressed, I think, but it's different. I think most people, they get to, I don't know how old you are, but I think everyone looks back on their like teenage and 20-something days being dirt broke and like, it's like, wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like you have different things that you're worrying about or thinking about. Like having money is just a resource. Like capital is a resource, and it's not the only resource that you need.
For sure. Then you have to worry about kids and all that. And then now I viscerally understand the feeling of like worry about losing money. It's like, wait, this more money makes you more stressed. You don't want to lose it, which is so stupid. But
and then you actually won. I think you won a bunch, like a grant, kind of from Google. How did that happen?
Yeah, so Google did this thing called the Android Developer Challenge. I think it was 2008. We had already kind of got started with our V1. Our V1 of the product was pure safety. Our one and only pivot was actually after we did this prototype for the Android phone. So iPhone was out. They'd announced third-party apps and weren't out yet. And then iPhone had no plans to allow background location access. That actually wasn't until like iOS 4, which I think was 2010 or 12. Whenever it was weird how people don't remember. You could not have apps running in the background on iPhone for the longest time. So that was going to be a big differentiator for Android. So Google put $10 million towards stimulating developer interest in the then upcoming Android phone. And so we entered that contest. We didn't have any clue what we were doing. There were really no such thing as smartphone apps. I mean, iPhone was fresh. And we won that. There were 10 top prize winners. We got $300,000. It was 25 for the first gate, and then 275 for the second. And that was actually a grant, so we were profitable that year. Which was funny. The funny thing is that people are saying, "Wow, Google's putting $10 million towards these prizes," which sounded like a huge amount. Now tech's gotten so much bigger, but we have given Google way, way, way more than $10 million in App Store commissions. So we single-handedly
returned the entire program.
We literally funded more than that. I mean, we will probably end up paying Google. I mean, we have $400 million or so a year in revenue, growing very quickly. It's more iOS, but you take the App Store fees, like our fees just to those guys every year funding that whole program. So it isn't. I don't know if Google planned it that way, or I don't know if anyone thought mobile would get as big as it did. But it is interesting how this was meant as a stimulus program, and then just one company has paid. We'll definitely pay them back order of magnitude for that entire thing, if not more.
What was the landscape like of sort of consumer apps at the time? Like, was there anything that had kind of, gotten big, or was it still kind of flashlight apps? And
no, there were no apps when it first, like literally. So 2007, iPhone came out, it was only iOS apps. I think it was 2008 they opened up the App Store. So this is all happening in parallel. So we were literally part of the launch of Android. So they gave us this G1 prototype phone, and there were no Android apps, just us.
Did you get any benefit? Like, did you get on kind of like the default Android like setup?
No, that didn't really. It was just Wild West out there. Actually, how we grew is we kind of cheated the app stores by stuffing keywords, and we did all these different clones of the versions of the apps, and we just gamed the system in ways you couldn't now. And so a lot of people ask me, like, how do you grow? It's like the growth hack. Well, I tell people it's actually not what we did. It's the idea of like thinking creatively and finding gaps in whatever system there is. And as new platforms emerge, like new gaps open up and then everyone rushes in. And so it's more about being creative. But no, I guess the fact there were like less than 20 launch apps, we were one of 20, so you could have anything and people would download it. But this was the Android G1. It was a tiny, tiny market.
Yeah, I don't even remember what that phone was, to be honest.
It had a physical keyboard. It had a little flip thing. Yeah.
Was it a touch screen still?
Yeah, it's still touchscreen, but with a keyboard.
I'll have to look that up. Oh, yeah, I'm seeing it. It reminds me of one of those like BlackBerry sidekicks where you
Yes, it was like a sidekick. Yeah.
Interesting. I completely forgot about this thing. I never had one, so.
Yeah, and I did. I'm still forgetting about it. Just shows how time flies.
How did you get people to start using it? Or like, what was the big use case? Was it like, what was the marketing and the messaging around it?
Location sharing and safety. But our one and only pivot was in that early day because we started purely about emergencies, but we realized out of sight, out of mind is a huge problem. Kind of common sense once you learn consumer psychology, but I still see people making these mistakes again and again and again. But what we realized is seeing that marker, and there's something so much bigger here. So the idea was get people in for free using free location sharing and then upsell to safety. And right when we launched, actually before we launched, like we were not the first people to come up with location sharing. It was not a new idea. We were the first company to do it on the smartphone, but Sam Altman was doing Looped for kind of old J2ME phones, and Steve Wozniak actually had a company called Wheels of Zeus, which was like going to put antennas on schools to track kids.
What?
Yeah, look it up. Wheels of Zeus.
What? Okay.
And you could go back to like any Star Trek episode with a communicator, right? Like everyone's like, so I would not claim to have invented location sharing, but I think we were the ones who saw that the smartphone was a unique way of doing it that was going to open up opportunities that were very different. And I think we sort of pioneered the UI paradigms for location sharing that stand to this day.
Yeah. And then you kind of added a bunch of different things around that, right? Like, how did you just think through the product roadmap of just like, here's what we should add at this point in time?
Well, when we had our pivot and we kind of renamed the company Life360, we kind of got Life Ready before it was only we were less than a year old when we shifted. But when it became clear, I could like close my eyes and could see the product of the future, and I can still do it. And it still frustrates me we're not further along. So it's not what you asked, but one thing, we did the opposite of prevailing startup advice. We were kind of like lockjaw on a vision and everything be damned, this is going to work. The only real signal we had was that when we would get people using it, they seemed to really love it, but we had to just if we were to kind of air quotes like trust the data, we would have shut down so many times. So I'm wondering if our stubbornness is that luck. I'm sure. Well, I know it was a lot of luck, but you hear a lot of people talking about how people should learn when to quit, and it's so easy to throw good money after bad, which is true. But I'm extremely happy we didn't take that advice, because it was like probably 7 years of barely making it.
So how do you rationalize, like, you see the data, there's like 1% of people use this feature, no one retains, or it's a bad decision based on the data. What's something that goes through your head that makes you say, oh, we should actually keep doing this?
Well, I think it's two things. It wasn't necessarily a bad decision based on the data. I think most people who call themselves data-driven are myopic, narrow-minded thinkers. Seriously, I judgment is so much better than data. I truly believe that for a consumer product. And there are different stripes, but for like ones that are building like user experience first products, like you have to have belief and vision. But it was like, what are the glimmers? Like we would have a small group of retained users who used it a ton, and they'd be so upset about all the bugs because it's really hard to do location, but they cared and they used it and they suffered through it. And it was enough to say that like once this like gets bigger, like when we started, everyone had to have an Android G1 phone. How impossible is that? Like, because kids were getting hand-me-down phones, there wasn't demand for smartphones. So we just had these small glimmers, and we could see there's a lot of organic top-of-funnel demand for things that were safety. And that was enough to say eventually the world's going to catch up. And it just seemed so obvious to me that the idea that you wouldn't know the location of people you cared about. And eventually it's like the vision's people, pets, and things. And so we're still early in that journey. But I think you are now seeing more and more like people are putting trackers on pets. We're going to do our new one next year. And so we're moving to everything being connected to the cloud. You can either get excited or creepy about it, depending on where your mind goes around. Like it's going to be like a singularity. We're all going to be linked to the machine. The things that people consider like no-go zones today, like the second they provide any convenience, like no one cares. Social norms change. If you give people the dopamine hit or reassurance that like nothing else matters. And I'm not saying that good or bad. I'm saying that matter of fact. I mean, a lot of it probably is quite bad.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, any technology, like every technology can be used for good and bad. One of the episodes that will have come out probably about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago by the time people hear this, we were just talking about like throughout human history, like when fire was invented, right? Like somebody could say, ooh, this is hot. You can get burned. It can burn down your hut or your house. And you can just say like, let's ban fire. This new technology, we can't have fire anymore. And if you'd have done that, like we would not have anything that we had today. But it has a ton of benefits. Like you could cook food. You can see. It keeps you warm.
The only if I'm going to kind of steel man the other side is we haven't met any other alien civilization yet. Like, is there some big, great filter that's going to kill us all?
Well, we're recording this while the drones in New Jersey are a big topic. That
maybe they're the aliens, yes. What is the answer to Fermi's paradox? It's weird. So maybe it's nuclear kills us all. Maybe every advanced civilization kills us all. I don't know. There are lots of other positive explanations, but so I guess I can understand why people are scared of things. The thing I would say where I've gotten really good and I think was naturally gifted is like understanding human psychology from first principles. And my mom would always tell me I was on the edge of Asperger's, so I never really cared about social norms. But I just think anything people say they care about, as soon as it becomes convenient, they stop caring. Period.
You mean because it's so convenient they don't have to think about it anymore, you're saying?
Just anything. Like, I mean, I remember forget about location sharing. I was in college when Facebook became a thing. I remember like it was just finished, and then Beacon came out, which is the Facebook news feed. Like, oh my God, Mark Zuckerberg's finally overreach. Like, it's actually going to tell people when you post. How invasive. And now the entire internet is like, you post and it tells the entire world, even people you don't see. And like, I guarantee if you went back to like, let's even go back to 1999, you're going to put your entire family photo album on the world for people to see. Everyone's like, you're crazy. I'm never going to do that. And now everyone puts their entire photo album in the world for everyone to see.
Did you get any pushback like that with Life360? Like, this is insane. Like, why would you want to?
All the time. And it actually worked to our benefit. And I think it still works to our benefit.
How so?
Because people misunderstand us. Like, we're within a stone's throw of 100 million active users, and we have very, very little competition. Apple is really the only guy out there in town. They're not direct competition. They're more an alternative. But most markets our size would have like dozens and dozens of very well-funded players in the space, and we had very few. There were some on the friend side. I know you know the Zenly guys who I admire quite a bit. Well, Zenly's gone now, they're Ramo, but I admire them a lot. They got funded, but like there should have been 20 companies. And I think a lot of it was location sharing was never a hot category. Kind of the coastal highbrow elites love to kind of look down on stuff like this disdainfully, as like you must be in a bad family or you're a bad parent if you're going to use something like this, because they misinterpret it as a control device, and it's really not. There's no corporate speak in that. I mean, yes, after hundreds of millions of downloads, we've heard every bad story you can think of, but to your point on technology and fire, like if we're going to find the absolute worst use of anything, like I'm sure I can find someone who's been killed by a fork. And are we going to ban forks because one person's been killed? I mean, we're not. But yes, we were very, very misunderstood.
Yeah, and you mentioned it was I think you said specifically the first 7 years were hard. I know you did end up raising some money. Like, what was that like to just get people to, convincing people like, hey, this could actually,
Well, I was very bad at pitching, genuinely. Now I'm above average, but I'm not like one of those gifted reality distortion field people, and I hate overselling. It makes me very, very uncomfortable. So I'm always worried about losing investors' money, even though they don't care that much. And I've done a handful of angel investing. I don't really care if someone loses my money. I care. I don't want to lose it, but I don't feel bad about the entrepreneur. So I was just hustling, but I was definitely overly equivocal in terms of like, well, this could happen. It might not work versus like,
we're going to change the world.
Yes. And I always got that advice, but when it clicked, it clicked. So, but it was just pure hustle. And I actually found this flow chart I made of like how long it took us to raise our first $1 million. And there's like who intro to who. It's a completely different environment. Like YC was brand new, so we didn't have that same incubator set up. We did do 500 startups through the short-lived, which was a offshoot of a very short-lived Facebook fund. But that was after we were 2 years in. But that first couple of years, I was just showing up, taking every meeting I could. Like to me, it was like a big deal to meet a single VC because I didn't have any network at all. And I did going to Berkeley. I can only imagine if I weren't in the Bay Area, didn't go to school here. So that was helpful. So I was able to get a couple intros led to others. So if I didn't have a school network, the school network wasn't that helpful, but I can probably got like 3 or 4 leads from the school that then paid off. So that's all it really takes. You just need to get it going.
Yeah. What would you recommend for somebody if I'm listening to this, want to start a company, I maybe just don't know where to start on the fundraising side? Like how should I approach it?
I recommend the incubators, especially if you can get like a YC. I don't know what the other ones are like these days, but back in my day, which was not that long ago, but still a very long time ago, like 500 startups and Techstars were there, and there were a handful of other okay ones. But they would get you in a system, and there is a pretty tried and true path to getting off the ground and getting it going. And I think it's much easier now than it was back then. We raised our seed round in 2009, which is like the middle of the financial crisis, and people are calling it a nuclear winter. We raised $1 million and a $2 million pre-money valuation. That was extremely normal. That wasn't like a bad round. In our incubator class, the hot companies were raising a $3 million pre, and we raised a $2 million pre. So times have changed.
Was there any reason that that investors did or didn't invest? Like, was there a certain thing people got tripped up on? Was it a lot of like, I think you mentioned just like location sharing just kind of seems.
Well, the funniest one was many VCs had teenagers who never even have smartphones.
Oh, really?
This was in the early, it became pretty obvious by our Series A time frame, but seed round, yeah, it was like teenagers and smartphones, like, yeah, still productivity tool era. And BlackBerry still had market share, and Windows Phone was still a thing. So I don't say that to mock them. I think it shows like people are really there to look at trends. Like things are only obvious in hindsight.
And were you charging people day one, or when did you kind of first start charging?
No, it was very conscious not to charge people because the carriers started very quickly getting on the game with their family, like AT&T had Family Map and Verizon had, forget their name. They still exist, maybe. But people are like, how are you going to compete when the carriers are like, well, freemium. The only way we would have gotten told in the market was by having that freemium option. And I'm a risk-averse guy deep down in a very strange way, but it was like, if we don't go freemium, we're dead in the water because the only way we're going to make this thing work is get that huge user base, undercut the bigger competition, which was the carriers of the time, because they weren't looking at, it wasn't a venture back thing, it was just a way to add $15 a month to someone's phone bill.
It's funny that was a competitor, like looking back today.
That was a huge reason people would pass on us. There was a venture back company. I'm friends with the founder and CEO. Is a company called Location Labs. And they had a good exit, but they were sort of our indirect competition. And yeah, so freemium, we said we're going to go freemium and we'll really focus on monetization when we hit 10 million active users. And it was a lot messier. It's very easy to do a podcast like this and make it sound like this like really clean master plan. But it was like, well, that's working. We tried all sorts of different things, and we tried to have different features. We go direct to premium. That didn't work. So it was sort of just, okay, when we saw mobile was hitting, like, let's just double down on the big free user base.
So maybe that's like the thing to think about. If there's like a lot of competitors that are scaled bigger, they can out-resource you, but they kind of see this as like a tack on shitty experience, make a little bit of money. In that case, when you're doing a freemium out, just for the most part, focus on giving as good of a product as you can, maybe a better product. Don't charge for it yet. Then at what point would you start to think like, okay, maybe we should start to make some money? Is there a certain scale or like type of value prop you can give? Or
well, you'll know if you have the critical mass of engaged users and you have that good retention. For us, it was a little bit more practically oriented. Number one is we need to raise more money. So what do people expect to see? And I think so by the time you get to like Series B, for consumer, it's different era now and it's all about growth rate stuff. But for us, it's like, okay, like we have to show a business model. And then when's it actually going to move the needle? And so at 10 million active users, it's a decent sized base. You can monetize that.
Yeah. And was that kind of like alerts? Like what was the first thing you really charged people for?
We did digital only features. So it was extra location history, unlimited place alerts, so like geofencing, homework, or school. And then those were the two anchor products. We tested a few different things here and there that were part of that, but those were just basically putting paywalls in the app.
Interesting. And it was mostly the parents that would pay and like get a kid to download it.
Yeah. And then it got brighter. Now we actually hear that kids bring in their parents, that's probably one thing I didn't even foresee as a bullish person, that I thought kids would be neutral on it, but they are actually a big source of new customers.
Interesting. Yeah. Cause I know you had this one case where we were talking about TikTok a little bit earlier. You had this time when you sort of went viral on TikTok. What happened there?
There are a couple stories or chapters to that story. The first one, I was at a friend's house, and his teenage kids are like, "Are you the TikTok guy?" I was like, "No, never used TikTok." Like, "No, you're the TikTok guy." And they pulled the phone, and there was like a meme going around. I didn't even know how TikTok worked. This was like TikTok had just switched from Musical.ly, so it was brand new. And the thing was like, who created Life360? The kid would Google it and then pull out a knife and then go, beating yo ass. So part of it was funny, part was a little scary because all you need is one crazy, but I think that got over 100 million views of the hashtag Life360 creator or something like that. It's like, oh, whatever, I just ignored it, thought it was funny, but it got me watching the platform. Because like, wow, that's like a lot of traffic.
And kids like didn't like the fact that their parents knew where they were or like were spying on them.
I think it was just being funny. It was just being stupid. But then it got a little more what felt serious during COVID, where some teens organized a 1-star campaign under the guise that if an app gets a 1-star rating, Apple removes it.
Is that true?
Well, no, but also think about the algebra. All you need is 1 5-star and you can't be 1, right? You'll be 1.000. So arithmetically, it's possible if you have a single review to begin with. But that at the peak, that got 300,000 1-star reviews in a single day.
What?
I'm not exaggerating that number. And we tried everything to kind of see if we could stop it. Otherwise, but I just said, screw it. And I went on TikTok and made a fool out of myself and kind of pretended the board was firing me for taking the teen side and just did the opposite of what anyone would have expected us to do. And I was telling the teens how to break the app, and then I was going to make a feature that let the teens hide from their parents. And we did all that because we really are opt-ins. Like I went on to TikTok, look, if you don't use the app and you don't want your parents, like, here's how you can break it. Like, that's not the point of the product.
Was it called ghost mode? Is that what it was called?
We did a feature called bubbles. You could put yourself in a bubble and safety features would stay on, but your location would be hidden within the bubble. And it could be as big as a city. And then the ghost mode was sort of the slang version of that. And we made a filter on TikTok when it was very early. You could swipe your hand over your face and you'd disappear and turn into a silhouette. And then we took over the TikTok homepage announcing the new Bubbles feature, and the Ghost Mode campaign got 7.5 billion views. So it was like massive numbers. I do think TikTok kind of juices those numbers when you pay the money, because like 7.5 billion is like insane. So I think there was some level of early days of TikTok where they BS the numbers, but you could literally go on TikTok and the Ghost Mode hashtag, and 7.5 billion.
Wow. It's like, in theory, every single person in the world, or probably more likely.
Well, each video view, right? So yeah, but it was for a while. People would recognize me in the street and stuff like that. So it was legit. Like it was nationwide brand awareness with teens.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And so you need them to be opting in and using it, correct?
That was by design too, where there's no kid version and parent version. That was an intentional bet that we made that I think was smart, which is like a smart kid's always going to outsmart their parents. So why make them hate it? I remember when I was a kid, we had this software in our Mac called At Ease, and it was like a launcher for kids, and it would load as an extension. I figured out how you could just stop the Mac from loading extensions. It would bypass the system, then I could turn it off. So
it was like a internet blocker, like controls or something.
No, this is pre-internet, man. You must be how old are you?
I'm 33, almost 34.
Yeah, I thought so. You're a little younger than me. So I'm 41, but this was 90s pre-internet.
Okay, so it was just like controlling what you could open even and do on the computer.
Launch. It would take over the screen. It'd be a launcher with a very limited number of apps you could.
Oh, okay. So like a whole separate operating system almost. Like you couldn't even actually get to the desktop. It was just like,
think of like a Android launcher that has 5 buttons on it for the most boring products.
Interesting. Okay.
I got to like Mavis Beacon typing, and maybe I had the Amazon Trail. Was the Oregon Trail?
Oregon Trail, yeah.
Well, no, it was the one after Oregon Trail, but it was like the Amazon. You're on like a river, but it was like basically Oregon Trail, but for the river. I'm trying to remember what game this was now.
I've never heard of that one.
Am I allowed to Google while we're to Amazon?
Yeah, we're allowed to Google.
Or maybe ChatGPT can do it. I'm going to see. It's the greatness of ChatGPT.
Or Perplexity. Did you ever use Perplexity?
Isn't it still a ChatGPT wrapper or OpenAI wrapper?
I don't think so. I believe so. Their results are a little bit different, and I believe it's because they use a bunch of different models, and they have kind of preconditioned it to different searches and different types of results and contexts will use different models, which it just gives you different results. I kind of go back and forth on all three.
Got it. I thought it was more. I've tried it a few times. It was close enough. I still have it. But anyway, ChatGPT won for me. The 90s Mac game you're thinking of might be Amazon Trail. It was a spin-off of the famous Oregon Trail series developed by Mech, the same company. Anyway, so I was right. I wasn't imagining the name. Amazon Trail.
So you are exploring the Amazon, I guess, in South America?
Yeah, but it's like very repetitive, and there was some educational component, I think. I think I was allowed that, but then the good stuff was behind the launcher. But in any case, I kind of projected myself 30 years into the future and be like, if a kid's going to try to get around this thing, they're going to get around it. So let's just actually try to not have the kid and parent version.
And then who are typically the power users? Like is it the parents that are opening it 100 times a day to see where their kids are? Or
usually parents, but the free user base is pretty broad. It's not just people with kids. It's a bit of a misperception. The people who pay us are in that more traditional kind of nuclear family bucket, but that's what we're trying to broaden out. But it's very widely used in a way that I think surprises people. It's not until people have used, well, most people use location sharing now in some way, shape, or form, but it's really just a convenience tool. And if you're in a family, you're all going to be meeting up at the end of the day. How far away is someone? It's just handy stuff to have to use.
Yeah, and I think I saw too, you have on your website, all public companies have an investor relations page, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's legally required.
Yeah, and like a hack, if you're not familiar with this, I literally just Google the name of the company, investor relations, takes you right there. There's always interesting stuff. Like for a lot of startup founders, you can find a ton of information on public companies that they are required to disclose. Some do more than others. But one of the interesting ones I saw on Life360, you have a map of the US and you have like state by state. And it seems like it's taken off more in certain states than others. Like, is that a cultural thing? Was it like purpose? Like, did you lean into?
I have working theories. So we're South and Midwest heavy. Number one, I think families start just a little bit earlier. And so it's really like the millennial generation is our main advocates. And it's not, the bell curve is just slightly shifted to the left. Attitudes around parenting are different. Like, I've lived in California and Texas. Texas is like I'm paying your damn bill. Put this on your phone. Whereas California's like, we're going to sit down with a therapist and talk about it. And in both groups, once they use this, no big deal, but it just got over that hurdle. There is kind of elitist view that you're a bad parent if you use location apps on the coasts. New York Times hates products like ours. And there are fair reasons for it, but I think it's because there are bad uses. And then this is on the edges, but where there's heavy driving culture. So like New York's never going to get big because like you don't drive in Manhattan. And I bet just the age demographics are also skewed. So I actually haven't looked at like, I wonder if per capita you have like more families with teens in Texas than you do in New York. I'm sure you do. How much the skew is, I have no idea.
Yeah, that would definitely make sense. And there's probably too, it's like if your kid is just driving to the restaurant with their friends, I'm assuming on the app you can get a notification is like they stopped driving. And a common text back and forth between me and my wife is like, hey, I got there, or like the plane landed, or like I'm at my hotel.
You got to download the app. We have automatic landing alerts. It just tells you, like, Turner landed at SFO. It's done, automatic. Yeah, it's built in. Now I'll pop out and get you an Uber as well too.
It'll automatically order an Uber?
We have an Uber partnership that just went live. So just these simple triggers, and we're getting paid for that too, which is nice.
And then you also recently launched an advertising business too, I saw. That's
actually that Uber example is ads, but it's contextual relevance.
Oh, nice. So you get a cut. So Uber automatically orders and you get like the CAC basically. Like you get maybe like a small like affiliate referral fee or something.
And it's a win-win because for customers like it, your wife knows you landed, you get the alert, welcome home, do you want the Uber? It doesn't feel like an ad. We do have some really annoying banners that I hate, but I hope within a year or two we graduate from them and don't need them. So it's really just to get the pipes going.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. What have you found then, like launching an advertising business? Like what was unexpected on that, or what did you learn?
I'd say ask me in a year, but I think the thing that we're really getting excited about is the ability to do offsite targeting. So I'm going to get this will be very overly simplified for people in the ad tech space and maybe complicated for people who aren't. So I'll try to split the difference. So advertisers need better ways to target and then also attribute success of campaigns. And something that we have is first-party location data for more than 15% of phones in the country. So we have the infrastructure to say, like, I want to send someone an ad who's in Costco right now. And then I also want to see if I sent them that ad, did it shift behavior? And we're uniquely positioned to do that because we have this real-time location platform giving locations back every second or whatever. So it's been pretty staggering how interested people are in that. And there's been a whole bunch of privacy blowups over the last couple of years around data. And one thing that's actually working very well in our favor is Apple now makes you ask for IDFA. IDFA is the identifier that is shared if everyone's seen those pop-ups. Do you give this app permission to track you across websites? It's completely mundane and benign, but like it kind of gets ahead of all the privacy concerns, or I think we're completely overblown. On Twitter, when you're asking people what to ask me, you had a very snarky
there's the one.
Commenter. I was telling him I want to be his friend. Maybe he thought I was happy you were my friend. I was pointing that at him, but we're friends too. But yeah, I kind of want to tell him how stupid he is.
Hopefully he's listening.
I hope he's listening. Like I'll send him some kisses after the thing. But like we should riff on this one. That I think people get hysterical about privacy for no good reason, or they're right for the wrong reasons. Like I think we're going to be like in this Westworld inevitability where truly the hive mind knows everything. But I think worrying about targeted ads is the least of people's problems. I think we should worry much more about a behemoth like Facebook with an AI machine that can process all that. We're just trying to target ads. It's really not that big of a deal. We never sell kids data to location data to brokers in the way that anyone thought we did. We help people target ads. And so to whoever it was on Twitter, stop being brainwashed, man. You're being hysterical. Find me one actual example of this hurting someone. Or not one. Find it as extreme. It's going back to like I can find someone killed with a fork. So like people, you can tell I have strong opinions here and get quite irritated about this, but like people keep going back to like one or two hypothetical examples that no one can confirm about the evils of data sharing, while Google and Apple and Facebook are ingesting all the data and put the AI machine. Guys, you have the wrong bad guy. We want to have a very privacy safe way of helping people target an attribute, and by doing it through the IDFA, We do not have to share any raw location data. So even people who get hysterical about it, or the regulators or press, don't worry about it. We're not sharing raw location data. So I get excited that soon you'll be able to come to Life360 and say, hey, I have this IDFA from this phone, and can you help me serve them an ad on my property? So it could be like another app developer. They could have a plugin of like a retail media network or some other piece of ad tech. They will use Life360 location data to serve that ad, and it will only be to users who have explicitly opted into this. And they'll be able to measure it very well too. So that's going to take us a while to build, but that's pretty exciting. And it's really only available to us because we have this very, very rich first-party data set. And then back to that Uber example, I'm making up numbers here, so given Republic, I have to be careful about when I'm just speaking directionally. But directionally, like the click-through of like a push that's contextually relevant is like 100x a banner because it's so much more. So it's common sense, but it's nice to get that validated. And contextual relevance, I think, is the game because advertising can be a very good thing. I personally love getting targeted ads. I buy all sorts of stuff that I get targeted with on my social feeds. It's fun for me. It's kind of like it's like retail therapy. And then my joke, which is sort of real, like the only thing I don't like is like I know when my wife's been using my computer because I get yoga pants ads. But like that's the worst of it. No one's going to come kidnap my kids because they're targeting me with ads.
Yeah, and to your point, it's like, do you want this like shitty banner thing that just like overlays, or do you want just like exactly what you want to see that's like integrated with?
Yeah, that's a good thing. Like I want to see new products and services that make my life better. That's fun for me. I enjoy it. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. Like, isn't that so much better than like you're watching TV and you're interrupted with 2 minutes of things that are random?
I mean, that's what TV feels like sometimes. It's like, give me targeted TV ads.
Well, you kind of can do that now in streaming, but I still don't like. I actually downgraded my Hulu account just so I could feel what it's like to watch TV ads, and it was insane how it was like 60% pharma. I think I'm not even exaggerating that number. It's like,
yeah, I think I've seen this.
Is your psoriasis acting up? Take this. Like, I think how many people have psoriasis? I think that was actually one of the ads I got. So it's like that's relevant to 1% of the population, and you're having to wait 30 seconds. Like, give me that targeted ad that's awesome. Like, what are you worried about? It's awesome.
Yeah, well, I think that's been a little bit of the discourse lately is that it doesn't even really matter if those ads are targeting the viewers. Part of it is like, hey, we're like 75% of all revenue for this media property. And because we basically fund you, you must be...
Yeah. Sounds like you're listening to Joe Rogan. Tipping your hat there.
Well, I mean, it's not even just Joe Rogan. I feel like it's kind of spilled out a little bit.
Yeah, to the mainstream. But it sounds a little conspiracy, but I wonder, how I heard is like if you're the TV company exec and pharma's giving all this money, it's not like there's this backroom thing that you shall stop this, but hey, do you want to bite the hand that feeds you? I can kind of see that. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it's like you just look at the incentives. It's like if 50% of your revenue is going to go away, you will no longer be profitable. You'll probably have to shut the business down because like you will probably do what continues to keep that money coming in. Like it's just the incentives. So like there could be a conspiracy theory here, sure. Like I'm not somebody who like gets really worked up about it, but it's like if you just look at it, it's like there might be something. So
I think it's I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think it's just human nature and incentive. So it's like the lightweight corruption, not the heavyweight corruption. And I think that's part of the problem with the system we have is sort of solidified the powers that be.
Yeah. And just thinking about like, okay, so advertising was a new kind of business and product you got into. You also have a hardware product. You acquired this company called Tile. How did that come about?
So they were the original Bluetooth locator tag, kind of what like AirTags are doing now. I was a seed investor there. I kind of always would joke with the first founder and CEO, like who's going to buy who? We always humbly thought that we would be bigger because freemium business model, all that. But our vision is people, pets, and things. And so in the same way that I was convinced that people will share location on phones, like the idea that you'll lose a dog or a cat or a senior citizen or a laptop or a bike, it's going to be downright archaic. And so we bought Tile after AirTags was out, and that was considered very controversial because, well, Apple's coming in this space. Our bet, and still proving out, TBD, I think we'll see in a few years if you're smart or drink your own Kool-Aid, it's going to be like the AirPods, where Apple is not first in the AirPods, and it was very good for the number 2, 3, 4, and 5 players because they increased the market size by 1,000x, not 1,000%, 1,000x. And so our belief is that we will be able to carve out our own niche, and we're going to be cross-platform as Apple's not. And if we can have more safety and protection-oriented tracking devices, if we have 10% market share, that would be billions and billions of dollars. So that's the leap of faith, though, that everything you care about will be tracked.
So with the AirTags or the Apple AirTags, the reason I would probably not use those is because I might have a family member that has an Android phone and I want it to all be synced up.
Well, there's more out there. So just a better experience, like we're just better when something's linked to Life360. We also now have an SOS functionality with the tiles, so you can click it and you can get help.
You can't do that with AirTags?
No. Then they also have nerfed the product for protecting items from theft because they're so scared of stalking, which I also think is essentially a non-existent problem. And if you were to put your AirTag on a bike and a thief steals, like ding, 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 AirTag following you, disable it. So it's like, if you want to protect an item with an AirTag, it's nothing. It's like a kid taking a teddy bear to bed. It's just making you feel good, but not actually working.
So yours is silent, like you can silent track it?
Well, we don't do the notifications by default. And if you upload your ID, you can actually literally opt out of the scanning network. So if you want to protect your items from theft, Tile is just such a better option.
Interesting. And you're kind of doing like a new launch of the product, I think I saw. Like
we did a new lineup this year, just a few weeks ago. And then we're doing a GPS-enabled pet product next year, and then elder care the year after. And then we're having one crazy flyer where my co-founder, still on our board, he started a company called Hubble, and they're actually doing two-way communications from Bluetooth to satellites in orbit. So 2 satellites are already up, and it seems to be working, which is amazing. But if this does what it looks like it can do, we'll completely leapfrog the AirTags because the one thing that Apple has is that bigger network. We'll have full coverage anywhere on the globe, period.
Wait, so what does Apple have? Is it Bluetooth or?
It's Bluetooth, but it's peer-to-peer based on being in range of other iPhones.
Oh, got it. Okay. Interesting. Well, what have you learned about launching hardware products? Like somebody who's never done it before, like what's been the biggest learnings?
They've been more cliche. Hardware's hard. You don't get the same second chances, a lot of moving parts. So I don't think any of that was particularly the most insightful. I think the more interesting thing, it's not the question you asked, but integrating 2 companies of similar-ish size. We were bigger, but just very, very different cultures, even though the posters on the wall were quite similar. So that was tough. And then we bought Tile. The market crashed a couple weeks later. I told my investors I was mad at them for not telling me the market was going to crash. So very, very bad timing in that regard, because we had to do a RIF immediately because the market demanded positive cash flow and all that. So that was the much harder part. The insight was less about hardware per se. Yeah, hardware's hard, slower. It's not software. Different approach.
Yeah. And I think one interesting story I think you guys kind of went through is you wrote a letter that was just said, "Dear piece of shit." What is the story of this letter?
Oh, that was completely unrelated to this. It was a patent troll. It's actually 10 years ago now because I somehow got a reminder of literally a decade. But as many entrepreneurs see, you get patent trolls coming after you and sending these very polite letters about trying to partner and license their technology. They're just shaking you down. And I think I was a little bit drunk or something. And I was just so mad, and we raised a bunch of money. So I replied, "Dear piece of shit," to the demand letter and basically said, "They'll see you in court." And I think they thought that was going to be like somehow helpful, and they sued us, and they actually referenced the letter. So it was like on public record, but it just galvanized so much support. Like lockjaw, they assumed they could settle. And I said, the second you go, I'm not settling, and it's a penny. And if we do this, even if we somehow win, we're going to go for the fee motion, and we're going to go the whole duration. And that is so rare to do that no one believes it when you say it. Now no one sues us anymore. Tile has gotten sued, but Life360 still just no one touches us. And I think we'll probably get some new shots taken at us. It's been literally a decade. But basically went the whole way through the federal appeals court, where we actually won, got a fee motion, they appealed. So it was like a very long journey. And one of my proudest moments is the opposing counsel screamed at me in the hallway of a courtroom. He was just so upset because you're supposed to settle. You're not supposed to go to court. I was not being reasonable. And I was like, no, I'm not. So.
And it kind of felt like their whole law firm's business model is this whole patent trolling.
This law firm, it was Kenyon and Kenyon. I'm very pleased to say they went bankrupt.
I noticed that their website didn't exist anymore.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say it's because of us, but I think we had a small part to play, and hopefully there's some karma there. But yeah, plaintiff lawyers I really struggle with as a class of people. They make me so angry.
Yeah. And so why didn't you settle? Like, because that seemed like, because you just pay like a couple $100,000.
Principal, I need to be motivated. And when you're working so hard and we had just raised some real money for the first time, and then someone you've never met, who you've not copied at all, have no clues, is trying to shake you down, like I want to sleep at night. So it was very reinvigorating. And so settling, we had written so many small $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 checks, like enough was enough. And then no one sues us anymore.
So you had been through this before?
No, we've been through it, and it just sucks your soul.
Is it like a time thing too? Like it's so many of these small little...
Yeah, it just adds up, and then it's just if no one stands up for it, the system corrupts. I wonder, would it be justice or revenge to just sue plaintiffs' lawyers to make their lives miserable? Do they deserve that, or would that just be? I think justice is good, revenge is bad. I don't know. Like, what's going to make them stop? What's the non-troll version of it?
The non-troll version of justice?
How do you stand up to them like that? I think our country's getting ruined by these onerous regulations and lawyers who will sue you for anything.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like revenge is maybe a personal thing, and justice is something that the world deserves.
Are you allowed to feel good about justice? Because like, is a little bit of Schadenfreude okay? I don't know. Probably. What would like Jesus or Buddha do or something? I don't know.
WWJD.
I'm not that religious, but Jesus got mad at the money traders in the temple, right? I don't know. Maybe, well, you know your Bible. He knocked over their tables, got all pissed. So.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's some biblical overtones of righteous anger. So anyway, I'm not religious in that sense. It's an interesting question, but it felt very good to squish the patent troll.
Yeah, it's definitely something. Like I feel like you kind of see it pop up all the time, where like some random company is suing, company that you've heard of, and it just kind of disappears usually. And then basically what happens is
you just give them some money.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
But that kind of seems unfair. Like I could sue you right now for if I had a patent and you have to pay me $100,000 to shut up. And like, that doesn't seem fair.
Yeah. Well, I think this repeats across society on many levels. That's why we're like signing waivers to sneeze and stuff. Like
Wait, signing waivers to sneeze?
I don't know. I made that up. But it's I don't know. Like probably if I go in a room, if you sneeze, you could hurt yourself.
Oh, like slipping and falling on someone's property or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I just popped in my head, but it's like everything's going to be so controlled. People are worried about getting sued.
One other question I thought was super interesting of what you guys did. You're a publicly traded company. You're currently public in the US, but you didn't originally IPO in the US. What is the whole story with that?
So we went public on the ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange. We started that process in 2018, and they were giving the pitch instead of the Series E or D or F. Just you can become public a little bit earlier, get the benefits of being public, single class of shares, better governance, liquidity, without having all the downsides of a private round, which is a lot of structure, a lot of control in the investors, and the ability to really, as a founder, get wiped out. And so I've always been a downside focused person. The valuations were very similar in terms of what we were getting from the Valley versus the ASX. So I was like, hey, it might look weird, but we have no preference stack. I can get some liquidity, and it's pretty powerful. And for a while, we looked dumb because all these companies in 2020 was this crazy headline valuation.
Yeah, you could have kept going. You could have been like
we could have kept going, or we could have SPAC'd at $10 billion or something. And there were moments where like, shoot, like we did not, there was a whole nother way to go, but we played the long game and it worked pretty well. A lot of it was that downside focus because like, what if things didn't go well? What if I got fired or quit or something? And if we sold for like 500 million, I got nothing, that would suck. Cause that could have happened with our pref stack. Investors get paid back first and the later stages have more and more structure on them. So ours wasn't quite 500 million.
Can you maybe, if somebody's never heard about like a pref stack, he doesn't even know what that is, can you just explain that real quick?
Yeah. So the easy way of thinking about it is when you get an investor, they get the first dollars back before you get any dollars. So let's say the company's worth $900. An investor puts in $100, you're worth $1,000. If you sell for $100, it's all going to go to the investor. You're going to get zero. And if you sold for $200, the investor would get half and you'd only get 100, even though ostensibly you own 90%. And so these preferences can stack on top of each other.
So there's like multiple rounds of doing that.
Yeah. And then sometimes, we never had this, but you'll get what's called a there's a multiple on it, like a 2x, 3x. So that investor puts 100, they actually get the first 300 back. And more of that was happening. And that's what private equity does. And it's not inherently good or bad. It's just trading off ownership for risk. And so, hey, if you want to maximize the ownership you have, by all means, go get a big pref stack. Could work out fine for you, but it can blow up in your face because it's kind of like leverage. So if you're public, you only have one class of shares. And I'm oversimplifying, but essentially you only have one. So my shares are the investor shares. So if you take our same analogy, the company's worth $900, you raise 100 in an IPO, now you're worth 1,000. But there is no differentiation between you and the investor. So if you sell for 100, yeah, that investor's only getting 10 cents of their money back, and you're getting the 90 left over. Or not left over, you're getting pro rata. So in that sense, it's much, much more founder and employee friendly to be public.
Yeah, another benefit like we were talking about before.
It's a huge benefit, and you can just sell your shares and all that. I'm locked up as a founder, so I still have the vast majority of my shares in the company, which is stressful. But yeah, if you're an employee, you can just push a button. It's like cash.
Yeah, that's nice. So why Australia? It was just that Australia was open to you doing it. Like you couldn't do it in the US, or what was the?
We were too small for sure. So we probably, when we started the process, we're less than 50 million of revenue, and you could definitely not do that in the US.
Wait, so why can't you do that in the US? Is it like a compliance?
No, it's not compliance. Just a lot of this is market norms and practicality. You have to get a deal together. You have to get a bank to take you. I mean, you could do a direct list at any size, I guess, but it just would. You have to have certain liquidity and volume requirements. So it's more how do you get a liquid market going?
And did you get like local Australian investors that bought in then?
Yeah, and the story was our first outside angel was Australian. By sheer coincidence, he became a pretty prominent VC there. He knew the CEO of the exchange. I was actually there on vacation. It's like, yeah, let's just do a couple meetings. And then one thing led to another, and like, let's try this thing.
Interesting. Okay. So then, like, what do most people not know about the IPO process? Like, how long does it take? Like, what goes into it usually?
Well, I've done it on Australia and the US now. They're similar but different. Ironically, from a CEO standpoint, the NASDAQ's much easier than the ASX, which is probably that surprised me. But basically, if you oversimplify the process, first, there's a massive amount of compliance stuff you have to do. It's like your accounting has to be spot on. You can't have any sort of squishiness there. There are all these rules you have to attest to. It makes me understand why these big companies that sound like they're probably being stupid and bureaucratic, they're being bureaucratic. They're not being stupid. It's like literally laws you have to follow, and people have to sign off that you're following these laws, and you have auditors that have to sign off. So we don't even get to say, oh, we're good. No, it's like the auditors have to say we're good. So you better go with eyes wide open. You're going to be adding a whole bunch of accounting and compliance costs that really actually hurt the business, but what you need to do. Then you put together your marketing materials, which isn't all that different than a pitch deck, but it's much longer and much more onerous. So in a pitch deck, you can kind of say whatever you want. Like you can't outright lie because that's fraud, but you can paint a rosy picture. When you do an S1 or a prospectus, the lawyers have to verify every number. And when I say every number, I kind of mean almost every number. Like if I say this market's worth $100 billion, you have to go find a market research report that backs that up. You can't just say it. And everyone knows it's BS, but you still have to find something to point to. And they're going to look at your methodology, and you'll be sued for the smallest little thing, and the lawyers to sign off. So we had these Excel sheets of like, you put a number in the pitch deck or the S1, and then it has to be diligenced by a lawyer, and you have to actually have backup supporting material for each one. So just think how onerous that is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's probably like a team, like multiple people who just did that full time, and then it takes a bunch of your time too, right?
Second time round, the US one, I realized how people, they don't even read the S1.
That's probably true, yeah.
So I don't know if I've ever said this in the record. I did not read our own S1.
Oh man, okay.
Because I realized it wouldn't do any good, and I think part of an entrepreneur is like, what is my actual leverage point? And I'm sure some people on the board not be happy to hear that. But on the Australia one, I read everything, I agonized over it, and then I realized it was like a good-looking paperweight. And so as long as the numbers of our team was there, I mean, I learned the pitch deck cold, and I knew the core numbers cold, but like really going through the S1, no, I just figured the lawyers are going to have it, like endless risk factors. And it was a bit easier the second time around because we'd already been public on the Australian exchange. So it's not quite as crazy as it sounds because it was more procedural. But so anyway, you do that, you get the materials, you have a bank that is going to represent you, or multiple banks usually. You have one that's the lead. And then they essentially go and bring you the investors. You do what's called non-deal roadshows, which is before you're officially live, you're testing the waters. Then you file the thing, then you do the real roadshow. And that's when you then get to the end of the deal, you price the round, where you kind of see what the demand is. People put indicative bids saying like, oh, well, if you're at $50 a share, I'll buy X shares. If you're at 60, I'll buy this. And if it's over this much, I'll do 0. And it's this kind of like slowly pushing chess pieces down the board. So IPOs do blow up at the last minute, but one thing that was quite interesting is it's almost like this dating ritual where like you're kind of moving forward, you get more interest, and like a bank looks really bad if they kick off a deal and it doesn't close. So by the time you're going on the roadshow, you have a pretty darn high chance that it's going to close.
Interesting. Just because they know that they can probably line up enough interest.
You've already had it soft circled. You've done the non-deal roadshow. You're going to go to the anchors. Like, okay, if you do this, I'm probably in for this. So you're able to get a pretty good sense. And this is a very well-oiled machine. And it is why if you're not like the hottest of the hot companies, you need a bank. Like I think Spotify did a direct list. And it's like, if you have so much demand, you can kind of like, you can come to me. But we were not in that bucket. So you need the bank to put their name on the line and all that. Oh, and one thing, right before you actually do the roadshow, or at some point later in the roadshow, actually, it's the bank underwrites it, so they're actually taking the risk. So when you sign on the dotted line, if the investors don't come through, the bank actually has to fund it.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's towards the very, very end of the process.
So, and they pretty much know, like they feel pretty confident, like we'll be able to line up. It's basically like it's like mutual funds or maybe some hedge funds or something, or like, so it's like a pretty broad pool of capital.
Yeah. And then there's a whole kind of, they call it a book build about what are the different investors you want in the stock. Like you actually don't want hold forever investors because you want trading volume. So you want a few hedge funds that are probably going to be trading you in that very first day. You want some people that are long only. The long only guys, you actually don't want to give them the full allocation. So if the IPO trades down, they're going to be there supporting you. So there's a whole method to this.
Yeah, and you probably have, I mean, because you're kind of turning over your cap table from, I know for you had like Fontinalis, you had Bessemer, they'd owned it for like 15 years or however long, and they probably want to start to take some liquidity off. So you want to make sure that there's a little bit of demand for that immediately, or I guess they might lock up. So like over the next couple of years, there's new people coming
there are
in.
different lockups based on who you are, and everyone has to agree to it and sign their different paperwork, and you often will have a secondary component, so there's a buyout of those investors as part of the transaction.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what was COVID like for Life360?
In the short term, it was horrible because we lost like 70% of our downloads, like more or less literally overnight.
People just stopped traveling.
Why would you use Life360 when you're just sitting at home? It was great for games. It's something you're like bored, but we were the opposite. So we got over that very quickly, but the market just priced us for bankruptcy for like a year. So it was very, very irrational.
And you were kind of starting to think about transitioning over to the US market around that time too, right?
Yeah, we wanted to do it 2022. And well, so 2020 COVID hit. 2021, we were really starting to do well and firing on all cylinders again. We were going to relist in 2022, and then the market crashed. We had to kind of wait 2 years to get through the doldrums. We were doing well, and we really credit Reddit for opening up the window for us because they were sort of a consumer product that went out before us with a lot of hype. And so Reddit went out, and we were like, okay, we got a couple months to get this thing done. This whole IPO window thing is quite real as well, too.
Really? Well, because I hear some people say that it's kind of bullshit. Like you can always go public.
You can, but going back to like, again, not anyone, to go public, you don't need all these. You can do direct lists and all these things. You have, again, there's certain requirements on size and all the compliance nonsense. But the worst thing you want is to have a busted IPO where you have no liquidity, because then you're like an orphan and then you're stuck. And that's what happened to the SPAC companies.
Oh yeah, true.
Just look at what happened to their trading volumes. Like they just became like persona non grata. So yeah, you can go public whenever you want, but if you want to get the right investors on board, if you want a good bank to take you, And getting a good bank is a signal in and of itself. That's why there's the bulge brackets and the boutiques. Like in terms of block and tackling, it's all the same. It's kind of a commodity. The basic skill sets are kind of commoditized, but you do need the banks who can put their name on the line, and they kind of give you that mark. This is like a legit IPO. And then you have the boutiques that are like really awesome as well. They round it out. But yeah, imagine if you don't have all that. So you could just be an orphan company.
Another question, I know it kind of came up a little bit earlier, was with the Zenly guys. You are, I mean, technically, I guess, competitors, or like at one point you could say you guys are competitors, but you're actually pretty good friends with them. Like, what is the relationship like with the Zenly guys?
So Zenly, just for background for everyone, there was a friend location sharing app that sold to Snap. For a couple of years, they were direct competitors. They launched a few years after us with a product called Delert.us.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But they were always amazing at execution to this day. Snap bought them, they shut it down, and the team relaunched a product called Bump. The overall company is called Amo. I'm still so in awe of how quickly they can move. But once they became Zenly, they weren't exactly competitors to us in any sense. Like we always thought they weren't. And we actually did get hard data when Zenly shut down. We only got like 500,000 MAU from them. That was kind of fuzzy math, but like we tried to see what that bump was. So the family use case and social use case as of now is very discrete. So I think they're solid team. Antoine, the CEO, like, I mean, one of the best product people in the world. And like, they were purists, I think, largely in a good way. Just like, man, they were so user focused. We've made a lot of sacrifices over time, and that's been good and bad. Like we were self-sustaining and cash flow positive because we were kind of good at that line. But yeah, they were just a very impressive group of people who I look up to quite a bit. We still compare notes because the real bad guy in the room is Apple, and the odds that we put Bump out of business very low, in the same way they put us out of business very low. But the odds of Apple really kind of like messing it up for all of us, it's real. So we're sort of like collectively the resistance in some ways. And not that Apple's that bad, but we just need enough to say, hey, they crossed a line here, they crossed a line there. And in general, when we do have direct competitors, I try to be friendly with everyone as well. I mean, for a number of reasons. There's just practically speaking, like people buy each other all the time.
You might need to team up on something.
Yeah, and it's probably even when you're talking to other investors, they ask you, what about this company? Well, I know the CEO. That it probably makes us both look good, right? Like we're competing, but probably makes him or her look good to say he knows me, and I look good to say he knows them. It's like, at least they're on the radar, their head's not in the sand. And then on a human level, like, it's kind of a cutthroat world, and at the end of the day, this is all just a dumb game of life. So we're all people just trying to get our startups going, and I think in general, people are way, way, way too scared of like someone running off with a good idea. Like it's hard enough to get people to think you're onto something, then like, what are they going to do? Just like steal it? I mean, sure, within reason, you got to keep things close to the chest, but that's what I think about competitors in general. And yeah, very, very impressed with the Zenly team.
Yeah. How do you recommend getting to know your competitors? Like, you just, shoot them a quick note, be like, hey, Chris, like, really respect your guys' product. Would be just fun to get coffee sometimes. Maybe it might be.
Yeah, something like that. I don't remember how they've all met, but it's once you're plugged into the valley, it's a very small world. Especially, I think actually when I was most plugged in, it was probably when we were like Series C stage. Now that we're public, I'm like an introvert. I go to very, very few conferences. I saw you at the Fontanalis one. They were seed investors for us. I wanted to kind of give back a little bit, but actually the biggest change in COVID, we went fully remote, and I bought the place I have now out in the country, and so I'm out in a tiny little town most days. I rarely go to San Francisco, although I am going today, so I'll have to wrap up soon because of that. Yeah, but I think when you're in that fundraising mode, it's a very, very small valley. And even if someone's out of the country, everyone knows everybody. So I'd encourage people to do it, and most people are nice, good human beings.
Yeah, I would say so. I feel like you don't want to share too much. Like, you probably don't want to hang out with your competitors all day. Probably better to hang out with your customers. But
yeah, I mean, if we had a true competitor, I would probably I still would want to know them. Well, actually, we'll take the company Location Labs that they powered the carrier tracking apps I mentioned, and they were biggest at the time, and we talked about roll-ups and all that, and it was clear we were competitors, but I still think usually the competition's your own execution than the other company. So even in that case, theirs was really like getting the carriers. Ours was doing our own direct-to-consumer model. It was competitive, so we weren't going to tell them all our secrets and roadmaps, but it was still better just to know them. And hey, if we did not get that critical mass on freemium, we probably would have been very happy to know them and tried to have got a soft landing there. And I haven't talked to that CEO in a while, but after all is said and done, we all went out to dinner with our wives and all that, and it's like, it's good.
Yeah. I think another interesting thing that I've heard you talk about, I don't think this is really that much of a hot take anymore, but you're not really a big fan of the lean startup philosophy, even though you were kind of a lean startup. Like, what's your thinking there?
The specific part I don't like about the lean startup philosophy was this over-reliance on data. And I actually am not anti-lean startup per se, and I've met Eric Ries a few times back in the day. I think he had a good idea that was perverted. Back to like religious analogies, like maybe the original founders were pure, but then the church takes over and ruins things. So I think it's more that versus the thing in of itself. But like most frameworks can be taken to an extreme, and you also have to know the context in which they evolved. So if you look at when Lean Startup came out 15 years ago, or maybe even closer to 20 now, technology was very immature. There were not these huge entrenched incumbents. And the people who were entrepreneurs were like dyed-in-the-wool founders with extreme kind of vision and like lockjaw, and I'm kind of in that bucket. And so you think, hey, like no one knows where this mobile thing is going. No one knows where this Web 2 thing's going. Like just throw things at the wall, see what sticks, and be open to change. That makes a ton of sense. I am very supportive. But if you look at what we have now with some people, you can't do that on a 20-year-old platform where the obvious ideas are already taken. Everyone's already thrown everything up. So you have to do something that's really meaningfully better than the competition. So I see so many people even with our own company, I hope people listen to this. It astounds me how narrow-minded we can be with data. I'm going to try this and it's going to work or it's not. And I'm going to see it. That's not bad per se, but you need to be very, very intentional about what you're actually testing. And the odds that you just do something, especially from an innovation standpoint, that you just throw it up and it's crap and it sticks, like those days are gone. Maybe for AI or VR, it would work because we just don't know what people are looking for. So you do get to say, I'm going to do a crappy chatbot or something for something. And because we don't know what people are looking for, maybe that will actually get a great use of the lean startup, but not for mature industry. And I think the other thing is entrepreneurship is probably like, I don't know if there are numbers at this, but I would imagine there are at least 10x the number of startups started than when I started. I don't know is there data on that? I'm sure there must be.
I mean, if you look at venture funding, if you think like venture-backed startups, like tech.
Maybe seed deals per year.
I mean, it's definitely a lot higher. I don't know the exact numbers, but the dollars that go into it, definitely a lot higher.
Well, dollars 100%. But I think that it was not the cool thing to go out and start a company when I started Life360. The cool thing for college kids I was in business. It was like consulting or banking, and engineers were going to like big companies. It was kind of weirdo still doing startups. So now people who made it through the education system who are more natural rule and process followers, they're looking for rules and frameworks to succeed in a startup. It doesn't work that way. So you're taking people who are already overly inclined to process, and you're giving them a process that kind of absolves personal agency and vision. And then you get to pretend to be a startup founder by following a process. And you've done a lot of these interviews. I don't know a single kind of like home run level consumer startup founder who would advocate for the lean startup in the way it's being advocated for now. I think they might go back 20 years or 15, like, oh, it's a different time. Yeah, that made a ton of sense. So that's more what I'm getting at. It's not inherently bad, but it's been perverted. And you have to take any framework for the time you're in. Agile and waterfall too, right? Yeah,
I definitely. I'm just thinking through like evolve. I think B2B, it's very much just like knew this customer, knew the problem, been doing it for 20 years. I'm just building a company to fix it. It's a little bit more straightforward sometimes. Beyond the consumer side, a lot of it, and even like companies that I've invested in, it like you give them the money for something, and like whatever's in the pitch deck, maybe it's still the general problem space is the same, but like the actual application of like how they solve the problem never is what they originally thought it was. So
for sure. And I'm not anti-testing by any means, but like now people have minimum lovable product, minimum remarkable product. Like
I've never heard that one before.
but make something that people love, and it really needs to be enough for people to love it, especially if you're going into something there's already alternatives and options. So in some ways, it's really just start with first principles thinking. Not all the time. Like if you try to go first principle in everything, you'll never get anything done. But like if you zoom out and think about how you're running the company and how things should work, like be a holistic thinker and don't just do it just because. Learn when to question, when not to question. But yeah, for consumer products, like I think judgment over data, especially in the early days.
Well, that's a good way to end it. I think this is a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please leave a quick review or comment wherever you're listening or watching. Make sure to check the show notes for more on the topics mentioned throughout the conversation. And if you don't want to miss a future episode, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, to get each episode plus the transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.